Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand you over to Jerome in conversation with Lindsey Davis.
How's everyone doing? Are we nice and wakeful? Looking forward to the end. So this is the end. We're going to talk about many things. I'm an academic, as Richard says, and I have a kind of anthropological interest in you all. I've been sitting on the sidelines looking at you, studying you, listening to what you say and the strange noises you make.
Well, that makes two of us, because that's what I think a novelist should be doing as well. The quiet person in a gathering is probably writing a book.
Exactly. So I'm meta going on there. And I'm always fascinated to meet historical novelists because, in my view, you all have unique perspectives on what you are doing, and you will have thought about what you are doing as writers in a very different way to someone who's, say, writing contemporary fiction, crime fiction, or other kinds of genre fiction. And to that end, I'm very interested in hearing what Lindsey has to tell us today about her career. As Richard said, 20 years writing, garnered with prizes, critical reviews, sales. She's the kind of complete package. We can learn many things from her. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask some kind of seemingly gentle questions, some loosener questions to get her into some kind of relaxed state of mind, and then we're going to open over to you. So what I wanted really to begin with is your beginning. How did you first start thinking about writing about the past? Where does this come from?
I started thinking about writing when I was 5 and was told by a teacher at school when I was learning the alphabet that we didn't have to copy out of a book to practice. We could make up our own. And that was the moment for me when I thought, what a wonderful thing to make up stuff and write it down. Historical interest came later, I suppose really with Rosemary Sutcliffe. And that can be dated to whenever it was that I had chicken pox, and my poor mum, desperate to stop me scratching, first of all, she said, "Don't scratch or it will stay with you for life." And when she left the room, I showed that I was a keen researcher by going like that. And I could show you that she's right, but I'm too modest to do that. And then in desperation, at some moment when my father wasn't listening to the cricket on the radio, she brought the radio into my room, for we are in the Stone Age here, where a household would only have one radio and no television. Can you remember that? Don't answer. And she said, "I think you might like this." And it was The Eagle of the Ninth on the radio. So that is how I first encountered historical fiction. And I think it's significant because when I write, I hear it in my head like a radio play. There are very visual writers, but I am a radio play writer. And it was Rosemary Sutcliffe, obviously, who introduced me to the Romans, but also to the English Civil War, which is my period, strangely enough.
Oh, we'll talk about that later.
We will.
So in terms of first impressions, fine, how did it then develop? How did you become
I
someone
read.
who wrote?
I read for years and years, avidly, and what I found I was most often reading were historical novels. And I want to take issue with some of the attitudes that were shown earlier on today by people implying that readers like a period. For me, I would read anything about any historical period if it was a good book and enjoy learning about something I didn't know. And although I'm absolutely dead set, if I can here voice a strong opinion, against writing historical novels for didactic purposes, we've all read some of those, haven't we? I do think that one of the appeals is to go into a different world and essentially to learn about it, although you're also losing yourself in a different world.
So did you start by thinking that you might mimic those kinds of examples, those people that you were reading?
You used the word mimic.
Horror.
Horror. Do you base yourself on it? No, I thought I would write as me. I was very innocent and naive because you are not supposed to do that. You are supposed to mimic or model yourself upon whoever is the bestseller of the time when you are struggling to write your script. I thought you should be original, and that is why I ended up writing about the Romans, specifically because nobody was doing it. Can you imagine going into a bookshop or a library and there's no books about gladiators or soldiers at all? And therefore it was very hard. And I do wonder if I hadn't struggled for 5 years to find a publisher for what I was trying to do, which wasn't gladiators and soldiers, but was eventually the Romans. If I'd never found a publisher, would all those lads writing that stuff not be able to sell their books? We'll never know. I do sometimes joke and say, well, how nice it would be if they gave me a penny for every book, because I cleared the way for them with the publishers who thought the Romans were too hard. But they won't, ever.
And how did you come upon, or how did you start writing, literally? How did you,
I had a real job, which I recommend to everybody who wants to be a writer. I think writing, teaching, being in the church, all those sort of jobs are better if you've first of all done a different job and lived in the real world where you have to get up and go to work at 8:30 in the morning, because you're going to be writing about people who have to do that. And I was a civil servant. And when it came to being a civil servant under Margaret Thatcher, I was so unhappy that I left, causing outrage, because in those days nobody did leave the British civil service because we had an index-linked pension. I now have taken my index-linked pension, and I can tell you I was right to leave. It was worth staying for.
See, Thatcher is to blame for everything.
Yes.
And one of the things we talked when we were wondering what to talk about today, we wanted to sort of open up was we've heard quite a lot over the last sessions about the historical element of historical fiction.
Yes.
Research, attitudes, ways in which we might think about the past and communicate that. We haven't talked a great deal about fiction.
No.
And what I want to, because I'm a literary scholar, I'm interested in how people write and in sort of those kinds of approaches. Now, firstly, do you have any kind of, did you bring, because you did an English degree, right?
I did, and I think that's absolutely essentially important to the way that I write. Not only was it in English, it was called English Language and Literature, and I almost like the language more than the literature. I certainly like the prose more than the poetry, and that is essential to the definition of the way that I write. I have absolutely no doubt. When I'm writing a novel, it is plot, characterization, dialogue, narrative, something I call tone, which when I was learning was also called decorum. I haven't mentioned history at all. That's just like if I was writing a novel about accountants, there would be accountancy. Yes, it's a wonderful way to give depth and colour, but basically I think a novel is about people in situations, and they may be 2,000 years ago or 300 years ago, but I'm interested in the events and the reactions of people to those events just as much as if I was writing contemporary fiction.
I mean, tone is a lovely word, and it's something, you're right, it's something that, I mean...
Yes, it's very important to historical novels, of course, isn't it?
And it's the kind of atmospheric, I guess. How do you go about creating your tone, or do you now hear it?
Wish I knew. Instinct. I don't consciously think about it, but when I'm looking at what I've written, I will know if it sounds wrong, almost always. Obviously, you make mistakes, and people will soon write and tell you that you have got it wrong. But it's one of the things you have to do when you start out, and I know a lot of people here are starting out, and I can tell you it is the most difficult thing, to find the way that you write that seems to fit whatever historical period you're doing without jarring. You could, when I write about the Civil War, I could write in 17th century English, but it would be a barrier to what I'm really trying to say. So you have to find a way, I think, where you don't use words that are so modern they stand out. you don't obviously use anachronisms that will allow people to write and depress you by telling you you have done so. But you have to make your own way. And I define this mostly by what I do about things like swear words, where I will not use the really modern coarse swear words because they are too modern. And so I've had to invent my own system of particularly Roman swearing, which involves things like people saying Titans turds. I love that little bit of double T there, good. I will do something else, probably, because I want it to read so that people don't think that's wrong for whatever reason, but to be, as you say, smooth without being bland.
I mean, well, in the editing process, when you come back to something, does it look different? I mean, you say it sounds right. Have you had, in your experience, do you kind of come back to things and think, oh, actually, no, that's not right?
When you get old and tough, you do. When you're young and feeble, you think because you wrote it, it must be perfect. And you have to reach the point where you can be hard on yourself. And what that usually means is you miss it out altogether if it's wrong. Cut.
Fair enough. Talk to me about, you recently in your latter work kind of shifted toward more multiple viewpoints and third person away from first person. How has that been in terms of your rendering of tone and am I being picked up at the back? No, sorry. Right.
You're too relaxed.
I'm too relaxed. Did anyone hear that question at all?
Lad.
No? Okay.
Say it again.
I am asking, my question was, latterly, Lindsey's work has moved toward using multiple viewpoints from first to third person, and I was asking about what the challenges were inherent in that and how that has helped you develop or not develop as a writer.
It's a nice change, really. I started off with the Falco series being in the first person, really because, again, of the radio, where radio detective plays often had the detective himself doing at least voiceovers, although there would then be drama. And so it seemed natural when I started writing Falco that he would tell us the story in tough gumshoe language. After 20 books of that, I knew that it's a very vivid way of writing. It also enables you to slide in your own opinions subtly, and you have to be very careful about that. But it has disadvantages, which are that everything that ever happens have either to happen directly to the person who's speaking or be told to them. I'm doing it again with my new series, which is about his daughter, and so that's a different voice, which is a change, but again, it's the first person. I therefore have yearned to do what happens when you write in the third person, which is that you can have multiple viewpoints. And I've done it with all of my standalone novels, which included the first one, The Course of Honour, but then the big one was my first Civil War book, Rebels and Traitors, where it seemed perfectly obvious that there was going to be a major character on the parliamentarian side, the right character, I say, and a major character on the Cavalier side who could be won over. And in fact, in Rebels and Traitors, I've got a third character who's a kind of street scavenging child who's based on a real character from Birmingham, for whom the war is not being fought. Nobody cares about her. And I've shown some of the events in it because it is an enormous hit you on the head, give you concussion sort of book. I have been able to tell the same event through different people's experience, which I enjoyed very much.
That must be quite
yes, it's something that happens quite often in crime novels, is that you have a chapter told from one person's point of view, POV, as editors will call it, and then another chapter from somebody else's point of view, and it gives a lot of variety and enables you technically to explore more people than when you're writing in the first person. I've done that again with my standalone about paranoid tyrant Emperor Domitian, the book where I nearly came out in my true self as a paranoid tyrant, but I'm reining back as much as I can. And I had a hero and a heroine who were a soldier and a hairdresser, neither of which I'd ever thought I would do, and told huge chunks from their point of view. To the point that when the audio book was to be done, and they said, who do you want to read it? I couldn't actually decide whether it should be a man or a woman. So I personally went through it with different coloured biros and had different bits narrated by different people, something which sank like a stone and nobody's ever commented on it at all. But I felt that was right. Have I answered your question?
You have entirely answered my question.
Good, excellent.
Now, when you talked about how you think about writing, you said you didn't mention history at all, but we're in a group of historical novelists.
Yes.
So how do you, tell me a little bit about your research and how you integrate that, because we're talking about tone and style.
Yes.
How do you make that work, as you say, in a smooth way, in a way that sounds right,
well,
but that also satisfies those people out there who will tell you off for the wrong colour of, what was it, the wrong colour of togas? Anyway.
Tunics. Yes.
I'm not a historian.
The thing is, the red dye doesn't hold, so they're all right because they start off one colour and they gradually get paler and paler until they are pink. We don't usually think of Roman soldiers in pink, but that's what would have happened. I start with the fact that I read English, therefore I was taught how to do research in a much better way than any other disciplines are. I know how to go and look for what I want, how to find what I want, and how to judge what I want when I found it, and then put it over in an essay, or in this case, in a historical novel. So I do a lot of that, and because there's information on the Roman period especially is very, very scarce, I read primary sources, which luckily there aren't very many of, and I read them in English, I have to admit. I could, if I wanted to, if I queried some subtle point, I could go back to the Latin and be none the wiser. But I read Penguin Classics and the like of that, but I do read them. I go everywhere that I can and have a look, because I've learned that's important. I like going to archaeological sites. I like going to museums. And I think it's important that you do enjoy research. When people ask you about it, they often say, oh, you must have to do a lot of research, as though it's some terrible chore. But I'm sure I'm not the only person in this room who loves doing it. And I think that is absolutely vital as to why my books and other books come over well, is that the enjoyment I'm getting comes through. And people saying, oh, gosh, I didn't know that. Wow, how interesting, are excellent readers of historical novels. They're the people you do really want a lot of them. And then after that, it's use as little as you can, because otherwise it's didactic and boring. There's only one of my books where I think I really went to town on that, and that was the Aqueduct book, which was so interesting that there are too many things about aqueducts in my aqueduct. I'll own up to that. But generally, the aim of using it is to make it part of your narrative, and therefore it's got to seem as though it's just how you're saying, yes, they're in funny clothes and they're walking down different streets from us, and you describe them enough so that people can visualize that. But basically, it's people walking down the street wearing whatever they would wear, and what's important is what they're thinking as they walk down that street. And they will not be thinking, oh, I am a Roman wearing my toga today. They might be thinking, oh, bloody hell, I've got to wear, or Titan sturds, I've got to wear my toga, and it's really hot and woolly. And you can say that they hated doing it. But it's got to be a natural part of the story that you're telling, however tempting it is to say. And there were some togas that had wide stripes on them.
I mean, you're talking about walking down the street, and your novels are very interested in place. And
yes,
you're talking about going
I
to
care
places.
about place.
And I think everyone will hopefully agree with me. A sense of place is very, very important to the historical novel generally.
Yes.
Both in communicating how people live, but also about the kind of heft of it feeling right.
Yes.
How do you do that as a writer?
If you can, you go there. If you can't, I have written some books where I never went anywhere that's in the book, and I defy anyone to know which. The one set in the Middle East where they go to the Decapolis, and that seemed like an ideal challenge. Can I get all 10 cities of the Decapolis in, even though we don't know where one of them was. They don't go there because there's a plague, so that saved me on that. Some of the Decapolis cities I went to, and some of them I got out of books. And I'm not even sure I can remember which was which now myself. You have to somehow give it character, and if all you can find in a book is that there was an acropolis, there was a city wall, there was a river, you have to invent it yourself. And I think that's something I enjoy. I will make the people of that town mean-spirited or something. It's fiction, but then we're writing fiction, aren't we? So there's nothing wrong with that. If you can find some historic anecdote that says they were mean-spirited, fair enough, but if not, something will happen. The innkeepers will be foul. That's always a good one. Foul innkeepers. Cheating, no hay, terrible meals. Many of my books have that scene in it, though described differently in each one with subtle variations.
Right then, I'm going to now turn it over to you to ask your questions of Lindsey.
They're numb.
Or not. Yeah.
Something that has come up, I think, a couple of times today. Most of us writing about the past, we're writing about periods where religious faith and religious activity was a much more central part of society than it is today. Do you have any comments about that?
I'll sorry, just so everyone can hear the questions about religion and how you write about religion, really.
Well, I will now say, and don't all run from the room in horror, I am a fourth-generation atheist, so this is a problem for me. I am not interested. I'm the kind of atheist who doesn't want to justify being an atheist because I don't think about it. So in some ways, writing about the Romans has been easy because I didn't have to do Christianity and get it wrong. I didn't really want to do a lot of Roman gods either. So this has been something absent from my books quite often, except rare occasions. Falco is particularly prone to running into groups of Christians and beating them up. But I was writing a scene when the doorbell rang and it was smiley evangelists. I really do not like people coming to my home and smiling at me and trying to tell me their views and make me share their views. In my home, I say what the religion is or isn't. And so I went straight back in and wrote a scene where evangelists were very smiley and were beaten up. But will I ever address Romans turning into Christians as they used to do in Victorian novels? I probably won't. No, because part of the way that I see it is that I am redressing the balance between all those books like Quo Vadis and Ben-Hur and all of those, where the Romans were the heroes, therefore they had really to want to be Christians. They were just waiting to have it put in front of them. And I don't think, certainly in the first century, that's how most Romans were. And so my role, if I am an evangelist myself, is to show that they were not like that by leaving them out.
How did you find dealing with the religious controversies of the 1640s and 50s?
That was deeply tricky. These are supposed to be wars of religion. I made them wars of politics. I found that there was plenty to say. Occasionally I had to explain it. But I have done things in Rebels and Traitors. I actually say what the Covenant said, which I think most people have heard of the Covenant. Very few people have read it through. It makes your blood run cold, actually.
It's terrifying.
Yes, indeed. And I quoted most of it, because it's the sort of book where I did let myself go and quote real documents.
Have you done any novels of the Civil War period? Because your novels seem to be Roman. Falco,
No, I have,
the other
yes.
lady, and his daughter. But yeah, the Civil War is then serious and historical. Are you going to sort of cross that line?
I have crossed it. The lady's asking, have I done any Civil War novels? I've done two. One of which is an enormous novel of the Civil War, the causes of the Civil War. You have to address that, don't you? These are the causes of the Civil War as seen by my hero and heroine. The Civil War, the First Civil War, the Second Civil War, the Commonwealth. I thought I might never be allowed to do it again, so I crammed it all in. And then just when it started to get really depressing and it's all going wrong, I stopped because I'd done 250,000 words. So that is Rebels and Traitors. And I have also done more recently, because at the last HNS conference I went to, I was met by a lady who said, would I like to do a quick read, which is a special kind of book we can talk about in a minute. And she asked me if I would do the Civil War for that. So I've done 2. To answer your question. So what are quick reads? Let me do that.
What are quick reads?
Oh, well, I'm really glad you asked me that. Quick reads were devised, I think about 10 years ago, maybe more or less, originally for people who were adults but had only just learned to read, because you know we have a huge problem of illiteracy, hidden illiteracy. And people who were learning in adult life were finding that they had nothing to read except children's books. So this wonderful and not enough known series was devised, which are, some of them are fiction, some of them are non-fiction. Most are fiction. And they are short books with short chapters, short paragraphs, short sentences, short words, for people who struggle with reading. And all sorts of people who struggle with reading are now reading them. They're used for educational purposes. They're used by the TUC. They're used in prisons. I had to go to a prison, which was a bit awkward because I realised that I had written a quick read which is about prisoners who make an escape. I got there, I was surrounded by totally charming people who had committed crimes so ghastly nobody would tell me. And I thought, well, not only are they doing O-level English, but they're being given a book to tell them how to make a hole in a wall with a knife and a door hook. Oh dear. I wanted to do one because technically it's very challenging. And I think as a writer, I am interested in the technical side of writing. And I enjoyed it hugely, though I'm glad I haven't got to do it all the time, because you start with, you can only use words of 2 syllables at the beginning of the book, and that limits your vocabulary hugely. As you go along, you're allowed to expand to 3 or possibly 4, but not too many, because that's daunting. It was, if we go back to research, it was an unfortunate fact of the research I was using, which was written letters and indignation from the actual prisoners, because most of them were in the book were real people, and unfortunately they came from 2 towns in England that I would not have chosen for this. They were Cirencester and Marlborough. But we decided that we would stick with using the authentic names, and there have been no complaints that I know of.
Amazing kind of thing to set yourself, that you have to think in that way.
Yes, it's like a little exercise really, but also everything else that's normal applied, plot, character, all of that.
My question is, Roman culture was a very violent culture despite its advancement. Now, to what crucifixion was just a common thing for them?
Crucifixion was the way that people were executed, unless they were... Yes.
There. How do you approach torture scenes, atrocity scenes in that culture? To what extent do you go so that you bring interest, but don't...
I don't want to make people interested in crucifixion, do I? The question is how... Yeah, I know. Well, sometimes you want repulsement. In fact, the question is about Roman society in particular being very violent, and how do I approach it? Well, first of all, I don't often do it because I don't believe it was all violent. I think there were people living, especially in the provinces, but even in Rome itself, there were people living ordinary lives, doing jobs, having families, and that is my interest. So I start from that. But very occasionally, I want to show Roman society as it is. The 2 main areas, it seems to me, where it's very different from our own are gladiating and slavery. And I started off showing those as just happening in the background and just being spoken of as if they were part of normal life, in order to show that for the Romans they were. I don't want to impose our sensibility, even though there were people who didn't approve of this. And there's a famous piece by Seneca about the gladiatorial games. He means particularly the bits where prisoners are just being killed one after another, where he is showing the kind of disgust and repulsion that we would feel, really. Very occasionally, though, you want to shock. There is a scene that I didn't plan and that has horrified other people and horrified me, and I think horrified my characters. In the 20th Falco novel, which is called Nemesis, Falco and his best friend Petronius Longus, who are seen generally as amiable, good time boys that we love, get hold of a man they're trying to find information from, and he won't tell them, and they torture him and eventually send him to his death, though they don't actually kill him, they kill somebody else. And it is horrible. I haven't described it in huge detail. It's in fairly short chapters mostly, and it's done with very little elaboration. It's a very simple way of telling it. The facts are there. You read between the lines as to just how horrible it was. Unlike occasions when I've done horrible murders, we are there with them. We know what they did. One way I show revulsion is that Falco's wife, Helena, leaves home. She does. It happens in their house, and she says she won't stay there while it's going on. So that's one way to give a moral judgment to it. I think we respect Helena's views on most things, and if she won't stand there, we know this is serious stuff. But it happens to show that that sort of thing does happen. We know it happens these days. Don't worry. Don't worry. The question is, how difficult was it to get out of a Roman man's head and into 17th century people in England's heads? This is called writing. This is called having an imagination and using it to tell your story. And you have to be able to do it. I am not Falco, so when I write Falco, I have to remember he's a bloke. He's not going to do what I do. Well, he's going to beat people up, isn't he? Throw water over them and be cruel to them. I could never do that, perhaps. and it's part of, it's an exercise, a bit like I just described writing a quick read, really. It is the fascinating exercise of how can I write this so that it is different, so it's about different people. It's in different language. How? I don't know. If I knew how, I'd write how to write a historical novel book. It is a question of using your imagination, thinking about them as different characters. One way I helped myself was that the hero of Rebels and Traitors is tall and blonde. That was good for a start. After writing about a not very tall, dark chap, it did help. He's big, tall, he's a printer, he's completely different. So actually physical things can help you. But basically you've got to think about who these people are and whether they're different people in the same book that you're writing or whether they're completely different people in completely different book. You, as a writer, you have to think about it from their point of view and not your own. I think that's the really crucial thing.
Do you prefer writing in the male or female point of view?
It's good fun to have come back to writing as a woman in my new series, yes. But I liked writing Falco. I don't know quite what that says about me. I also liked writing more neutrally in the third person as well. So I think the answer is I like a bit of variety, actually, more than anything.
No.
Three Hands in the Fountain. A title that wasn't meant to be, but I started using it for a joke, and then I just couldn't let go.
I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask a last bit of question, which is about what you would like to do. You've written about men, you've written about women, you've written multiple viewpoints, you've written about the Civil War. What would be your ultimate?
Well, obviously a dog book.
A dog book? Why not?
Oh, dogs are always popular. I would like one day to have a go at something contemporary. I don't know what it would be, or I would have had a go at it by now. I would like to write something else that isn't Roman, because I didn't set out to write about the Romans. I set out to write about the 17th century.
You put compass a bit off there.
Yes, I know. It was just a case of you want to get sold, and what you're writing isn't selling. You have to write something else. That I throw out to those of you who are starting out. If you find that you can't sell whatever you're trying to do, you have to be like a biscuit manufacturer and invent a new recipe. So that was how I went to the Romans, not knowing that 27 years later I'd still be doing them. I would not like to write a sequel to my Civil War book, because it's the Restoration, and that is just too depressing for me. And so I think I'd like most next to do the 18th century.
Georgians.
Yes. I hanker to write a book about because I am an English person, obviously an English degree person, I mean. I hanker to write a book about the rise of the bestseller. But I floated this past both my English and my American editor a few years ago, and they just wouldn't have it. What are they frightened of? But one day I will, because I think having done printing in the 17th century, and the way that when censorship was lifted, documents of all kinds started to be written. Everybody who wanted to write had a go. And publishing as we know it really started then, although there'd been printing before. But this idea that you can have everything from domestic books to memoirs to novels to huge poems that are read by everybody, most of which are no longer readable. I tried to read Hudibras, which I hadn't heard of, for my 17th. I got halfway through, and that was a fabulous bestseller. How like so many of the bestsellers of the modern age, actually.
Right then,
So,
on that cynical
we better
note,
stop there, hadn't we?
Lindsey will be signing books.
I will. Thank you, Jerome, and thank you for being a lovely audience.